I thought I knew who I was. I thought I knew my family. But one $99 DNA test destroyed everything I believed about my life, my marriage, and the man I called Dad for 32 years. What started as a fun Christmas gift turned into the most devastating betrayal I never saw coming. My name is Sarah, and up until 6 months ago, I had what I thought was the perfect life. I'm 32, married to my college sweetheart Mark for 8 years, and we have the most beautiful 4-year-old daughter Emma. We live in a cozy suburban home with a white picket fence. Literally. I know how that sounds, but it was everything I'd ever dreamed of. Growing up, I was incredibly close to my dad, Robert. He was the kind of father every girl dreams of having. He taught me how to ride a bike, walked me to school every day until I was 12, and never missed a single soccer game or school play. My mom, Linda, used to joke that I was a daddy's girl through and through, and she was right. Dad and I shared this incredible bond that felt unbreakable. I have one older brother, Jake, who's 35, but we couldn't be more different. Where I'm blonde with blue eyes like Mom, Jake has dark hair and brown eyes like Dad. Where I'm outgoing and social, Jake's more reserved and analytical. We got along fine, but we were never super close. Just different personalities, you know? The funny thing is, people always commented on how much Jake looked like Dad. They'd say things like Jake is Robert S. Mini-Me, or that boy is his father's son. Meanwhile, I got the "you look just like your mother" comments my whole life. Never bothered me. I was proud to look like Mom. She's beautiful, and I loved that people could see the resemblance. My relationship with Mark started in college. We met during our sophomore year at a campus coffee shop. I was cramming for a psychology exam surrounded by textbooks and highlighters, probably looking like a complete mess. He walked up to my table and said, "You look like you could use some better coffee." I looked up, saw this gorgeous guy with kind eyes, holding 2 cups of what smelled like heaven, and I was done for. Our love story was one of those fairy tale romances you see in movies. He was studying business. I was majoring in elementary education. We complemented each other perfectly. He was practical and ambitious. I was creative and nurturing. We moved in together after 6 months, much to my parents' initial disapproval. But they came around when they saw how happy he made me. Mark proposed during our senior year in the most romantic way possible. He recreated our first date at that same coffee shop, got down on one knee, right where we first met, and asked me to marry him in front of a crowd of students, who all started cheering. I said yes before he even finished the question. We got married 2 years after graduation in my parents' backyard. Dad walked me down the aisle with tears in his eyes, telling me how proud he was and how much he loved me. It was perfect, intimate, meaningful, surrounded by everyone we loved most. When Emma was born 4 years ago, I thought my life was complete. She was this perfect little bundle with Mark's dark hair and my blue eyes. Watching Mark become a father was incredible. He was so gentle and patient with her. And Dad, he was absolutely smitten with his granddaughter. He'd come over every Sunday for what he called Grandpa and Emma time, bringing little gifts and spending hours reading to her or pushing her on the swing set he installed in our backyard. Family dinners at my parents' house were a weekly tradition. Mom would cook these elaborate Sunday meals. We'd all gather around the dining room table. Mom, Dad, Jake, and his wife Kelly, Mark, Emma, and me. Dad would always make these corny jokes that made Emma giggle. Mom would fuss over everyone, making sure plates were full and everyone was happy. I remember thinking during one of those dinners, maybe 6 months ago, how lucky I was. I looked around that table at these people who meant everything to me, and I felt this overwhelming sense of gratitude. I had parents who loved me unconditionally, a brother I could count on, a husband who adored me, and a daughter who was the light of my life. What more could anyone ask for? The DNA test idea came up during Christmas. Mark's sister had done one of those ancestry tests and discovered she had some distant relatives in Ireland she never knew about. She was showing us all these cool genetic reports and family tree connections at Christmas dinner. Emma was fascinated by the whole thing. She kept asking if we could find out where Mommy comes from, too. Mark thought it would be fun for our whole family to do the tests together. "Come on," he said. "It'll be like a science experiment. Emma can learn about genetics and we might discover we're related to someone famous." He was always looking for educational opportunities for Emma, which I loved about him. So we ordered 3 kits. One for me, one for Mark, and a kid's version for Emma. They arrived in early January, these simple little boxes that seem so innocent and harmless. Just spit in a tube, mail it back, and wait for results. What could go wrong? If only I had known that those 3 little boxes were about to detonate like bombs in my perfect life. I would have thrown them in the trash and never looked back. The first weird thing happened about 3 weeks after we sent in our DNA samples. Emma and I were at my parents' house for our usual Sunday dinner, when Mom made an offhand comment that, looking back, should have been my first red flag. We were looking through old photo albums. Emma loves seeing pictures of me as a baby, when Mom suddenly got this strange expression on her face. She was staring at a picture of me at about Emma's age, then looking at Emma, then back at the photo. You know, Mom said slowly, "It's funny how genetics work. Emma looks so much like you did at that age, Sarah, but—" She trailed off, shaking her head. "But what, Mom?" I asked, bouncing Emma on my lap. "Nothing. It's just interesting how she has your eyes, but Mark's coloring, and that little dimple in her chin. Where did that come from?" She laughed it off, but something in her voice sounded forced. Dad, who was sitting in his recliner reading the paper, looked up sharply. "What are you going on about, Linda?" "Nothing, Robert, just thinking out loud about family traits." But Mom quickly changed the subject and put the photo album away. I didn't think much of it at the time. People always make comments about who kids look like. It's just something adults do. But over the next few weeks, I started noticing other little things that seemed off. Jake came over to help Mark fix a leaky faucet in our kitchen, and while they were working, I heard Jake say something that made my stomach flutter with unease. "You know, man, it's crazy how Emma doesn't really look like either of your families. She's got her own thing going on." Mark laughed and said, "Yeah, maybe she's a genetic anomaly. We'll find out when those DNA results come back." But Jake's response was what stuck with me. Those tests can reveal more than you bargain for sometimes. Then there was the incident with my neighbor, Mrs. Patterson. She's this sweet, elderly woman who's lived next door since before I was born. She knows my whole family history and has watched me grow up. One afternoon, she was playing with Emma in our front yard when she made a comment that sent chills down my spine. "Your little girl is just precious," she said, watching Emma chase bubbles. "But you know, Sarah, she doesn't favor your side of the family at all, or Mark's side, come to think of it. She's got such unique features, that chin dimple, the way her ears are shaped. It's very distinctive." I tried to brush it off. "Genetics are funny that way, Mrs. Patterson." But she kept going. "I remember when your brother Jake was born. He looked exactly like your father from day one. Everyone said so. But Emma... ... She paused, studying my daughter's face with this puzzled expression. "She's beautiful, don't get me wrong, just ... different." That night I found myself staring at Emma while she slept, really looking at her features for the first time. Mrs. Patterson was right. Emma didn't particularly resemble Mark or me. I'd always just thought she was one of those kids who looked uniquely herself, but now I was second-guessing everything. The paranoia really kicked in when I was going through some old family photos to create a scrapbook for Emma. I spread out pictures of Mark's family and mine across the dining room table, trying to trace family resemblances. Emma definitely had my eye color, but that was about where the similarities ended. I studied photos of Mark's family, his parents, his siblings, his grandparents. Dark hair, brown eyes, olive complexion. Then I looked at my family photos. Mom's blonde hair and blue eyes, Dad's dark hair and brown eyes, Jake looking like a perfect combination of both parents. And then there was Emma. Blonde hair like me and Mom, blue eyes like me and Mom, but everything else, her facial structure, her chin, her nose, even the way her earlobes were shaped, seemed to come from nowhere. That's when I started really paying attention to conversations and comments I'd been unconsciously filtering out. My mother-in-law mentioning how interesting it was that Emma didn't look like Mark at all. My college friend asking if Emma was adopted because she looked so different from both Mark and me. Even Mark's dad making a joke about the mailman that ID laughed off at the time, but now seemed less funny. The breaking point came during a family barbecue at Jake's house. I was helping Kelly in the kitchen when she made a comment that nearly knocked me off my feet. "Can I ask you something kind of personal?" Kelly said, glancing around to make sure we were alone. "Sure," I said, though my heart was already racing. "Did you and Mark ever do fertility treatments or anything like that when you were trying to get pregnant with Emma?" I stared at her. "No. Why?" She looked uncomfortable. It's just ... Jake and I have been trying to have a baby for 2 years now. And we've been learning about genetics and fertility and all that stuff. Emma's features are so distinct, and she doesn't really resemble either of your families. I just wondered if maybe you used a donor or something. There's nothing wrong with that, obviously. I was just curious. Felt like the floor had dropped out from under me. Kelly was untrying to be malicious. She was asking an honest question because she was dealing with her own fertility journey. But her words hit me like a truck. That night, I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, while Mark slept peacefully beside me. My mind was racing with all the comments, all the observations, all the little hints I'd been ignoring for 4 years. Our DNA results were supposed to arrive any day, and suddenly, I was terrified of what they might reveal. The email notification appeared on my phone on a Tuesday morning while I was making Emma's breakfast. Your ancestry results are ready, the subject line cheerfully announced. Mark had already left for work, and Emma was at the kitchen table drawing pictures of rainbows, completely oblivious to the fact that my hands were literally shaking as I stared at my phone screen. I'd been dreading this moment for weeks, ever since Kelly's innocent question had opened the floodgates of doubt in my mind. Part of me wanted to delete the email and pretend we'd never done the test at all, but another part of me, the part that had been losing sleep and analyzing every family photo, with a magnifying glass, desperately needed answers. "Mommy, you look funny," Emma said, looking up from her drawing with concern in those beautiful blue eyes that everyone said came from me. "Mommy's just thinking, sweetheart," I managed to say, forcing a smile. "Finish your cereal so we can get you ready for preschool." But I couldn't concentrate on the morning routine. As I helped Emma brush her teeth and get dressed, my phone felt like it was burning a hole in my pocket. The answers were right there, just a few clicks away, but I was paralyzed by fear of what I might discover. After dropping Emma off at preschool, I sat in my car in the parking lot for 20 minutes, staring at that email. Other parents walked by, heading to their own cars, living their normal lives without life-altering DNA results waiting in their inboxes. I envied them. Finally, I called Mark. "Hey, babe, what's up?" He answered on the second ring. I could hear the sounds of his office in the background, phones ringing, people talking, the normal soundtrack of his day. "The DNA results are in," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "That's awesome. Emma's going to be so excited." "Did you look yet? Are we secretly related to royalty?" He was joking, happy, excited. Everything I should have been feeling but wasn't. I can't look alone," I admitted. "Can you come home for lunch? Can look at them together." Something in my tone must have alerted him because his voice changed. "Sarah, are you okay? You sound upset." How could I explain the weeks of growing paranoia, the comments from family and friends, the nagging feeling that something wasn't right? How could I tell him that I was terrified our DNA results might reveal that Emma wasn't his daughter? "I'm just nervous," I said. "It feels like a big moment, you know? It's finding out about our ancestry and everything. Of course I can come home. I'll be there in an hour." That hour was the longest of my life. I paced around the house, cleaned things that were already clean, started a load of laundry that didn't need to be done. I kept picking up my phone to look at the email, then putting it down without opening it. I thought about all the what-ifs. What if Emma wasn't Mark's daughter? What if I'd somehow forgotten about being unfaithful? Though I knew that was impossible because I'd never even looked at another man since we'd been together. What if there had been some kind of mix-up at the hospital when Emma was born? What if the DNA test was wrong? But then I thought about the alternative. What if I was letting paranoia and other people's random comments destroy my peace of mind over nothing? What if Emma was exactly who we thought she was, and I was about to put Mark through unnecessary worry and doubt? When Mark's key turned in the front door lock, my heart nearly jumped out of my chest. "Okay," he said, walking into the kitchen where I was sitting at the table with my laptop open but still showing just my desktop. "Let's solve the mystery of the Johnson family genetics." He sat down beside me and I could smell his cologne, the same one he'd worn since college, familiar and comforting. He put his arm around my shoulders and kissed the side of my head. "Are you ready for this?" I asked, my finger hovering over the laptop trackpad. "Born ready," he said with a grin. "I'm hoping we find out we're descended from pirates or something exciting like that." I clicked on the email and entered my login information. The Ancestry homepage loaded, showing 3 profiles: mine, Mark's, and Emma's. Each had a little icon indicating results were available. "Whose should we look at first?" Mark asked. My mouth felt like cotton. Maybe we should start with yours. Get warmed up with something. Safe, he laughed. Safe, it's just ancestry information, babe. What's the worst that could happen? We find out I'm related to some infamous criminal. If only he knew what I was really worried about. We clicked on Mark's results first. Pretty standard stuff. Mostly European ancestry with some Irish and German, exactly what we'd expected based on his family history. We spent a few minutes looking at the geographic breakdown and the potential relative matches. Okay, your turn, Mark said, clicking over to my profile. My results were equally unsurprising. Scandinavian, British, and German ancestry that aligned perfectly with what I knew about my family history. For a moment, I felt a wave of relief. Maybe all my worrying had been for nothing. And now, for the main event, Mark said, moving the cursor toward Emma's profile. See what our little princess is made of. This was it. The moment that would either confirm my worst fears or put them to rest forever. I held my breath as Mark clicked on Emma's results. What we saw on the screen made absolutely no sense at all. The numbers on the screen seemed to blur together as my brain struggled to process what I was seeing. Emma's ancestry results showed percentages that were completely impossible based on Mark's and my genetic makeup. This has to be wrong, Mark said, his voice tight with confusion. Look at this. It says Emma is 37% Middle Eastern and 23% Eastern European. That doesn't make sense. I stared at the screen, my heart pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. Emma's genetic breakdown showed ancestry from regions that neither Mark nor I had even trace amounts of in our results. It was like looking at the DNA of a completely different child. Maybe there was a mix-up with the samples, I whispered, though even as I said it, I knew it sounded desperate. Mark was clicking through different sections of Emma's results, his face growing paler by the minute. Sarah, look at this, he said, pointing to a section labeled Close DNA Matches. The list showed Emma's closest genetic relatives. I was listed as her mother with the expected 50% DNA match. But where Mark should have been listed as her father with another 50% match, there was nothing. He wasn't even showing up as a relative at all. This is impossible, Mark said, his voice breaking. The computer must have made an error. I'm going to call the company. But I was already scrolling down through Emma's DNA matches, my hands trembling as I read the names and percentages. There, sitting in the number 2 spot after me, was a match I never expected to see. Robert Johnson minus 25% DNA match. Predicted relationship. Grandfather. My dad was showing up as Emma's grandfather, but not through me. The genetic connection was coming through Emma's paternal line. Mark, I said, my voice barely audible. Look at this. He leaned over to see what I was pointing at, and I watched his face change as the implications hit him. If my dad was Emma's grandfather through her paternal DNA, Mark wasn't showing up as her father at all. That could only mean one thing. No, Mark said, shaking his head violently. No, this is wrong. This is some kind of mistake. But I was already clicking on my own DNA matches, searching for something I prayed I wouldn't find. And there it was, in black and white, destroying my world with clinical precision. Jake Johnson 250% DNA match. Predicted relationship. Half-brother. Half-brother to not full brother. My hands were shaking so violently I could barely control the mouse, but somehow I managed to click on Jake's profile. His results had come in too. He'd been copied on the same email notification. His ancestry breakdown was completely different from mine, showing significant Middle Eastern and Eastern European heritage that matched Emma's results perfectly. The room felt like it was spinning. I gripped the edge of the table, trying to steady myself as the horrible truth crashed over me like a tidal wave. Emma wasn't Mark's daughter. Emma was my niece, Jake's daughter, which meant that my dad, the man who had raised me, walked me down the aisle, and adored his granddaughter, wasn't my biological father at all. I think I'm going to be sick, I said, rushing to the bathroom. I barely made it to the toilet before I started vomiting, my body rejecting the reality that my mind was being forced to accept. Mark followed me, kneeling beside me on the bathroom floor and rubbing my back as I heaved. It's okay, he kept saying. We'll figure this out. There has to be an explanation. But what explanation could there possibly be? The DNA didn't lie. The numbers were clear and precise, laying out a family tree that looked nothing like the one I'd believed in my entire life. When I finally stopped being sick, Mark helped me back to the living room couch. I curled up in a ball, hugging a throw pillow to my chest, like it could somehow protect me from this nightmare. "Sarah," Mark said gently, sitting beside me, "we need to talk about what this means." I looked at him. This man I'd loved for over a decade, who I'd married, who I'd built a life with, and saw my own shock and devastation reflected in his eyes. "Emma isn't yours," I said, the words feeling like poison in my mouth. "But she's not Jake's either," Mark said quickly. "That's impossible. You would never, ... He was right. I had never been unfaithful to Mark. Not once. Not even close. I'd never even been alone with Jake in a situation where anything inappropriate could have happened. We weren't that kind of siblings. We didn't hang out one-on-one. We didn't confide in each other about personal things. Which meant there was only one possible explanation, and it was so horrifying I couldn't even let myself think it completely through. "Mark," I said, my voice hollow and strange, "what if Emma is Jake's daughter, but not because of me?" I saw the moment understanding hit him. His face went completely white, and he actually recoiled from me like I'd struck him. "You're not suggesting ... double quotes," he started, then stopped. "What if Kelly isn't Emma's mother?" I whispered. What if Jake and I have the same father, but Emma got her paternal DNA from Jake and her maternal DNA from someone else? The implications hung in the air between us like a toxic cloud. If Jake was Emma's father and I was Emma's mother, but Jake and I were only half-siblings, then there was only one way that could have happened. My mother, my sweet, loving, devoted mother, had an affair with the man who raised me as his own daughter. And somehow, impossibly, that affair had resulted in Emma. The next few hours passed in a haze of shock and disbelief. Mark called in sick to work, and I couldn't even think about picking Emma up from preschool. We sat in our living room staring at those DNA results like they might somehow change if we looked at them long enough. "We have to call them," Mark finally said. "Your parents, we have to ask them what the hell is going on." I felt like I was going to vomit again. The thought of confronting my parents, especially my mother, with these results felt impossible. "How do you ask your mom if she had an affair that resulted in your husband thinking he was your daughter's father when she's actually your half-brother's child?" "I can't," I said. "Mark, I physically cannot have that conversation." "Then I'll call them," he said, reaching for his phone. "No," I grabbed his wrist. "If we're wrong somehow, if there's some other explanation, we can't take this back. We can't unring this bell." But even as I said it, I knew there was no other explanation. The DNA didn't lie, and the numbers were too precise, too clear. Emma had gotten her paternal genetics from Jake, her maternal genetics from me, and somehow my mother was involved in a way that made my stomach turn. "Sarah, think about this logically," Mark said, though his voice was shaking. "When did you get pregnant with Emma?" I closed my eyes, trying to remember. "July 2018. I remember because we found out right before your birthday in August." "And when was the last time when could Jake possibly have ... "Never," I said firmly. "Mark, I swear to you, I have never been unfaithful. Not once. Not with Jake, not with anyone." "I know," he said quickly. "I'm not accusing you. I'm just trying to understand how this is possible." That's when it hit me. A memory I'd buried so deep, I'd almost forgotten it entirely. "Oh my God," I whispered, my hand flying to my mouth. "What?" "The cabin," I said, my voice barely audible. "Jake's bachelor party." Mark's eyes widened. "What about it?" The summer before Jake's wedding, Kelly had planned this elaborate bachelor and bachelorette party weekend at a cabin in the mountains. But at the last minute, Kelly had gotten food poisoning and couldn't go. Jake was devastated. They'd planned this romantic weekend before their respective parties. And suddenly Kelly was too sick to travel. My mom, in her typical nurturing way, had suggested that I go with Jake instead, just as a friend, so he wouldn't have to cancel the expensive reservation. "Sarah can keep Jake company, and you boys can still have your fishing trip," she'd said to Mark. "It'll be like a brother-sister bonding weekend." Mark had thought it was a great idea. He trusted both Jake and me completely, and he was swamped with work anyway. "Go have fun," he'd said. "Take lots of pictures of Jake being miserable about missing Kelly." "You went to the cabin with Jake," Mark said slowly, understanding dawning in his eyes. "For one night," I said quickly. One night and nothing happened. We had separate rooms, We went fishing. We talked about his wedding. It was completely innocent. But even as I said it, I was remembering that night differently. Jake had brought a bottle of expensive whiskey, a gift from one of his groomsmen. We'd sat on the cabin's porch talking about life and relationships and the future. I'd drunk more than I usually did, celebrating his upcoming wedding and enjoying this rare one-on-one time with my brother. Sarah, Mark said gently, "What do you remember about that night?" I closed my eyes, forcing myself to really think back. The whiskey had been strong, and I'd been more relaxed than I'd been in months. Emma had been born exactly 9 months after that weekend. "I don't remember going to bed," I admitted, my voice breaking. "I remember sitting on the porch, talking and laughing. I remember Jake saying something about how he hoped his marriage would be as happy as ours. And then I remember waking up in my room the next morning with a terrible hangover." Mark was very quiet for a long moment. When he finally spoke, his voice was cold in a way I'd never heard before. "Did you have sex with your brother, Sarah?" "No," I said immediately. "Mark, I would remember that. I would never do that, drunk or not. Jake would never do that. We're family." "Half-siblings," Mark corrected. "According to the DNA, you're half-siblings." But we didn't know that then. As far as we knew, we were full brother and sister. That's incest. Neither of us would ever. I trailed off as another horrible realization hit me. Unless I whispered, unless Jake knew something I didn't. Mark stared at me. What if Jake knew we were only half-siblings? What if Mom told him the truth about his parentage but never told me? What if that whole cabin weekend was planned? The thought was so horrifying, so completely devastating, that I started hyperventilating. Mark had to help me breathe into a paper bag while I sobbed and gasped for air. When I finally calmed down enough to think clearly, I realized we had to confront them. All of them. Jake, my parents, everyone who might have known the truth about our family while I lived in ignorance. "We're going over there," I said, standing up on shaky legs. "Right now, before I lose my nerve." Mark looked at me with concern. "Are you sure you're ready for this?" I thought about Emma, still innocently at preschool, unaware that her entire family structure was a lie. I thought about my dad, the man who'd raised me, loved me, walked me down the aisle, who apparently wasn't my biological father at all. I thought about my mother, who had somehow orchestrated the most devastating deception of my life. "No," I said, "but we're doing it anyway." The confrontation at my parents' house was the most devastating conversation of my life. When Mark and I showed up unannounced with the DNA results printed out, I watched my mother's face crumble the moment she saw the papers in my hands. "Oh, Sarah," she whispered, sinking into her favorite armchair. I prayed this day would never come. My dad, Robert, the man who raised me, sat in stunned silence as the truth poured out. Mom had had an affair 28 years ago with a coworker named David. When she got pregnant with me, she convinced Robert the baby was his. David had moved across the country for work and never knew I existed. But Jake knew. He'd overheard a phone conversation when he was 16 and had been carrying the secret for years. The cabin weekend wasn't planned. He'd gotten me drunk deliberately, knowing I was ovulating based on something I'd mentioned about trying to get pregnant soon. In his twisted mind, he thought he was giving me the baby I wanted, while ensuring it stayed in the family. The betrayal was so complete, so devastating, that I couldn't process it all at once. My brother, half-brother, had essentially assaulted me while I was unconscious. My mother had built our entire family on a lie. The man I'd called Dad my whole life wasn't my biological father. Now his granddaughter wasn't his granddaughter either. Mark filed for divorce 3 weeks later. He said he couldn't look at Emma without seeing Jake's face. And he couldn't look at me without wondering what else I might not remember. The marriage that had survived everything else couldn't survive this. The custody battle was surreal. Mark had no legal rights to Emma since he wasn't her biological father, but he'd been the only father she'd ever known. Jake, meanwhile, was in jail awaiting trial for sexual assault. I was left to pick up the pieces of Emma's shattered world while dealing with my own trauma. Emma asked where Daddy was every single day for months. How do you explain to a 4-year-old that the man who taught her to ride a bike isn't really her father? How do you tell her that her real father is the uncle who used to bring her presents, who's now in prison for what he did to Mommy? Therapy helped slowly. Dr. Martinez specialized in complex family trauma and helped me understand that what happened wasn't my fault. Being unconscious means I couldn't consent. Being manipulated by someone I trusted means I was a victim, not a willing participant. The hardest part was rebuilding my relationship with Robert, my dad in every way that mattered. He went through his own therapy, dealing with the betrayal by my mother and the loss of what he thought was his granddaughter. But love, real love, doesn't depend on DNA. "You're my daughter," he told me during one of our early reconciliation conversations. "You've been my daughter for 32 years, and some test results don't change that. Emma is my granddaughter because she's your daughter. Biology can go to hell." Mom and I don't speak anymore. The betrayal cut too deep. Not just the affair, but allowing Jake to carry that secret. Knowing what kind of person he was, and never protecting me from him. She sends birthday cards to Emma that I don't open. Jake pled guilty and got 8 years. He wrote me letters from prison that I burned without reading. Kelly divorced him and moved back to her hometown in Oregon. She sends Christmas cards sometimes, always including a note apologizing for things that weren't her fault. Mark remarried 2 years ago, sends Emma birthday presents and texts me occasionally to ask how she's doing. He was a good man who got caught in an impossible situation. I don't blame him for leaving. I probably would have done the same thing. Emma is 6 now, and she's the most resilient, beautiful, intelligent little girl in the world. She calls Robert Grandpa Bob and knows that her first daddy, Mark, lives far away but still loves her. She knows her second daddy made bad choices and can't see her right now. But someday we'll talk about it more when she's older. We moved across the country for a fresh start. I'm teaching 2nd grade at a small elementary school, and Emma is thriving in kindergarten. We have a tiny apartment with a view of the mountains, and we're building a new life based on truth instead of lies. The DNA test results are locked in a safe deposit box now, along with all the legal documents from the divorce and custody proceedings. Emma will need them someday when she's ready to understand her complicated history. But for now, she just needs to be a little girl who knows she's loved. I've started dating again. Carefully, slowly. His name is Tom, and he's a widowed father of 2 who understands complicated families and second chances. Emma likes him, which matters more than anything else. Sometimes I think about that naive woman who ordered those DNA tests as a fun family project. She had no idea she was about to lose everything she thought she knew about herself and her family. Part of me wishes I could warn her, tell her to throw those test kits in the trash and live in blissful ignorance. But then I look at Emma, and I realize that sometimes the truth, no matter how devastating, is the only path to real healing. She deserves to know where she comes from, even if it's complicated. She deserves a mother who faces hard truths instead of living in comfortable lies. Those DNA results destroyed my marriage, my family, and my sense of identity. But they also freed me from a web of deception. That was never my choice to be trapped in. Now I look at my daughter and I see only love.